Let me mention three things briefly that the Christmas story tells us. First of all, it tells us that God gets what we're going through. Jesus was born in a stable. Mary wrapped him in rags and laid him in an animal feeding trough as his bassinet, and because there was no room for them in the inn. He was pursued by Herod before he was 2 years old, had to be a refugee to another country to save his life, and ultimately was rejected by his own people in his own hometown, and finally was nailed to a cross. When we struggle and suffer, Jesus knows what we're going through. Nelson Mandela was in prison 27 years in South Africa for the crime of teaching during the years of apartheid that all people are created equally by God and therefore deserve equal kindness, equal consideration, and equal rights. 27 years in prison simply for believing what our faith has always taught to be true. Someone asked, "How did you survive that?" And he said, "There were times when it was difficult. But every time the going got tough, I simply told myself, hey, I'm going through a manger moment." He was basically saying Jesus came into the world and experienced what we experience, walked where we walked, felt what we feel, bled as we bleed, wept as we weep. From that manger, that inauspicious beginning, he went on to experience pains and problems, fears and tears, rejection, and all of it resulting in a cross. Jesus understands when you and I are down or afraid or worried or suffering or struggling. He gets it, which is why he says, "Come unto me, all you who labor and are heavy laden." I've been there. Let me comfort you for a while. Second thing the Christmas story tells us is that, and it's kind of the opposite of the first, things are not always as bad as they seem or as we fear that they are. Oh, there are bad things, bad times, bad situations, no denying. But not every situation is as bad as we think it is. Do you remember when the angel appeared to Joseph? It says that Joseph decided to divorce Mary quietly, for he was an honorable man. Joseph felt that he had been betrayed by her. They were betrothed, they were not married, but that is a legal situation. It was one step away from the marriage ceremony. You are now legally bound to one another, as would be any husband and wife. And so you don't just break the engagement, you have to go through a divorce. Joseph decided to do that because suddenly he realized Mary is with child and it's not mine. I have been betrayed. But then the angel comes and says, "Joseph, fear not to take Mary as your wife, for that which is conceived in her is of the Holy Spirit." And suddenly Joseph begins to think, oh my gosh, I thought this was the worst thing in the world, and now it's perhaps the best thing I could ever have imagined, more than I could imagine. And then the angel said, let me add another layer to it. As good as it sounds right now, it gets even better. You shall call his name Jesus, for he shall save your people from their sins. Sometimes things that seem terrible in God's way of putting our lives together work out for the best. Back in the economic meltdown of the 2008-2009 epoch, I read a story in the Wall Street Journal about a man in Brooklyn. He had been a Wall Street banker, and suddenly he was out of work altogether, couldn't find a job. And he was just distraught as he watched his savings go down and down and down. And a wife, had 3 children, expenses, mortgage, tuitions coming up, all the things that require our income. And suddenly there was no income coming in. And he fell into a deep depression until one of his teenage sons came to him and said, "You know, Dad, this could be a silver lining moment." He said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "This could be one of the greatest things ever happened for you." His father said, "Son, when you're where I am, when you have a family, when you're my age, you'll understand it better." And the son said, No. I think I understand it, Dad. I understand that my whole life I've heard you say you wanted to do something. You always had this dream, and you never got to do it. And you'd go to work in the morning with financiers and banks, and you weren't happy, and you'd come home in the evenings and you'd say, oh, I wish I could do this, but I'm stuck doing that. He said, well, Dad, you're not stuck doing it anymore. Why don't you chase your dream? So that father talked with his wife, and they decided to use what savings were remaining to rent a little space in Brooklyn and chase his dream. All his life, he wanted to be a baker, not a banker. He wanted to bake pies and cakes and cookies and bread. They rented a space, initially started out of their own kitchen, but they rented a small space, got some equipment on rent, and began baking. Found a few stores that took some of their goods. Little by little, people found out about them, and then somebody else, word of mouth. Long story short, today there are 3 huge plants in Brooklyn, and those baked goods go out to all 5 boroughs and beyond. Maybe not making what he made as a Wall Street banker, maybe he is, I don't know. But what he is making is a life with joy, fulfilling the dream that was his from the very beginning. Sometimes that which seems tragic is not always as bad as it seems. And then there's this final thing. The Christmas story tells us that wholeness is an option for us. The angel said to Joseph, you shall call his name Jesus, for he shall save your people from their sins. In the New Testament, the word for salvation is soteria, Greek word. It means wholeness. It means that the brokenness, the woundedness, the fractured feelings that we experience in life, they can be made whole. And the one who comes in Bethlehem is the one who works that miracle for us. When I was at Marble Collegiate Church, just starting out there, my predecessor, Arthur Caliandro, the late great minister there, wonderful man, wonderful friend. Arthur told me once, I've never met a person who wasn't wounded somewhere along the line. I've never known anyone who wasn't broken, longing to be made whole. He was right, you know. You live long enough and this world will beat you up or break you down. That is just the nature of things as we know them. But you and I also know that one comes to give us the gift of soteria, wholeness, to put our Humpty Dumpty lives back together again and to make them better and stronger than they had been before. The angel told Joseph, he will save your people from their sins. He will turn their brokenness into wholeness. That's the promise of Christmas. The world may get us down from time to time, but because Jesus was born and Jesus is with us, the world can't keep us down. When dark the night and heavy is my soul, God comes in light to love and make me whole. Merry Christmas.